Hello there, everybody. Well, you know what you're here for at this point. Obviously, every video has a title. So, we will be stripping down this 1.6 today. This is a base 1.6 out of my 1981 Escort L trim wagon. So, I don't expect to see anything incredible here. All I do expect to see, is a decent engine once we start tearing into things. So this engine, as you see right now, has somewhere around the tune of 150,000 miles, all fully documented. The previous owner, he had drove it since new, and drove it all the way until 2012-ish, somewhere in there, and documented every tank of gas with fuel economy numbers, and it's pretty wild. You can actually see the engine reach break-in, and then from there it just excels. It was pretty neat. I need to get that around sometime. It's not in this building, it's somewhere else. A pocketbook in the glove box. It just had everything for the car in it. So with that in mind, I don't feel as bad leaving this one in stock spec, but that's just what's going to have to happen for now. Normally, every time I touch one of these, I kick it, or I shouldn't say I kick it out the door. I throw it into a car with higher compression pistons than it previously had. That's really not going to be the case here. And I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do intake-wise. That's the other thing I usually do. I usually switch to the 1.6 high output intake, as it is larger diameter ports all across the board. And I usually port the head to match that. So then when you're all said and done, you have a 1.6 high output, which is worth 80 horsepower as it is. But then, with further port work in the head, somewhere around the tune of 90 is quite quite accurate of a prediction. So, and 90 in a 2,000 or a 2,100 pound car, it scoots along without any complaints. You have one of these in one of your cars, you will have zero complaints. However, having just the bottom of the barrel 1.6, okay, especially with it being an 81, because there's even smaller intake on these. Okay, yeah, I get it. You do have something to complain about. However, with that being said, there is a lot of junk around the engine that can be removed. This one you can see it, not from the side, it's too dark. But over here, hiding behind the starter, just because we're on this side, there's a giant steel bracket here. All right, its sole purpose is to hang the couple coolant hard lines like this guy off of it. And it just takes coolant from the, well, I shouldn't say it's from the water pump. It takes coolant from the thermostat housing. There we go, sorry. Coolant from the thermostat housing comes down underneath the engine to the heater core in the firewall. It comes back out of the heater core, comes back down underneath the engine. This is heater core return, goes up into the water pump pickup tube. So, and that whole setup can actually vary a little bit depending on the engine, but that's how all the 1.6s are across the board. Whether we're talking 81 to 85, they're all going to have some level of that. So, by ditching the metal bracketry, we start shedding pounds. Pounds equals performance, okay? When our car is only 2,100 pounds to begin with, you've probably noticed driving any of these that every time you add 50 pounds inside the car, it makes a noticeable difference in how it performs. So by us removing 50 pounds, every 50 pounds is going to have a noticeable improvement on its performance. And it's even reflected in the front suspension. It's a little too dark out for me to point the camera outside of the car right now, I guess. But so you'll do a few things, okay? Like all this steel hanger crap for the coolant hard lines, we get rid of the steel bracketry. We get rid of the hard lines. The other thing is these hard lines, they have their own itty bitty brackets that are welded on, and then those bolt onto our giant steel bracket. Those welds eventually fail, because one good pothole and you can actually jar all that. It just goes to show how much weight there is around the engine. The engine itself is a fine machine, fine spectacle, a fine specimen, but it's all this other crap that Ford threw at it that's really hindering it. Okay, so all the weight on all these welds makes them bust over time, especially on bumpy roads, especially on high mileage engines, because the longer you drive it, the more prone that is to happen. Here's some of those hard lines we speak of, and here's some of the other junk to remove. Okay, smog pumps and catalytic converters, and then all the other vacuum systems for the smog pump, that all disappears. Okay, so a catalytic converter, you're welcome to continue using one. However, get it changed out for something newer, something more efficient, something that's not plugged. Please just do yourself the favor. Either you remove it entirely and never use one again, or put in a modern unit that's going to be far more efficient and reliable for you, and might even weigh less. But however, if you do decide to go ditch the cat, but either way, if you replace it with something modern or you ditch it entirely, all the smog pump crap can go. There's roughly 20-25 pounds worth of smog pump stuff. There's this giant steel bracket that only holds the hard heater lines between the bracket and the heater lines. That's another 30-ish pounds. So by removing those, we've dropped 55 pounds. And we haven't even mentioned that we have one less thing depending on the rotation of the engine. So we're using less, we're sucking away less power by removing the smog pump. I know it's not much, but it's something. Okay. But the biggest thing is by getting the smog pump crap gone, I move my straps and everything. Assuming you don't have power steering, okay? If you have power steering, you're going to have a pump right here above the smog pump. But remove the smog pump on any of these cars, okay? Thank me later. But if you have power steering, you'll still have something here. Otherwise, even with the power steering there, you'll have better access to the backside of the engine. That's a bigger deal when we start looking at vacuum leaks underneath the intake manifold. There's a lot of thermal vacuum switches, if that's the right word for them. So they're little temperature controlled valves that reroute vacuum as the intake gets up to certain temperatures. And there are rubber connectors, but plastic lines out of all of them. And the plastic lines do tend to crack and snap off at times. And if you have a lot of miles and the engine's real shaky, these plastic lines rubbing on any kind of metal, even if it's not even sharp, that's the amazing thing. Even if it's just plastic that they're rubbing against, they could be rubbing against another vacuum line. They will wear themselves thin over the course of only about 100,000 miles. So be armed with that knowledge, huh? And then you'll get all these micro vacuum leaks, and you'll be like, well, what the heck? I can see it's not cracked up here, and I can move it, and it moves down here, so it's not broken. Then it's once you start checking every millimeter, you'll see, oh, it's worn thin. and you start looking around at the other ones. Oh, this one right next to it's worn thin too. Oh, good grief. So now you're doing a little bit more service. Anywho, getting back to removing a lot of this stuff. By removing the EGR, that will shed us another... the valve itself weighs only a couple pounds, and the pipe only weighs a couple pounds. So 5 to 10 pounds depending on the car. So now we're up to about 60 pounds. But the biggest thing with getting rid of the EGR is, with all this gone, you actually have full access to the oil filter from this spot right here. What does that mean? Well, that means you can change oil without getting underneath the car. Okay, let that sink in. I don't know how young or old you are, but if you can change the oil without getting underneath your car, you're winning. You're winning in the short term. You're winning in the long game, okay? It's awesome. And if you don't have power steering and you don't have a smog pump, look at that. You can reach the drain plug from up top too. Otherwise, worst case scenario, you squat down on your knees, get underneath the car with a wrench, stick it on, remove your drain bolt and the pan that you slid underneath the car. So now you're at the least able to change your oil without jacking up the engine or laying down on your... Well, sometimes you have to lay it down on your back, but you don't have to get under the car, which means you don't have to jack it up, which means the car can't fall down on you. Okay? All this, just little things that really add up to a fine outfit. What else? Mechanical fuel pump. Get that crap gone, okay? You don't need that. Get yourself a nice electric fuel pump. Get this thing gone. There's no weight savings. That's the sad part, but it's going to be more reliable. 'Cause depending on these carburetors, some of them will have a fuel return. This one does. Here it is. Fuel return. So if you're parked on a hill, or if the car sits long enough, sometimes you'll have fuel leaving the carb and going down the fuel return back to the tank. So what does that mean? Well, that means when you hop back in it and it's been, it's either the next day, or it's a few days, or it's been a week, whatever. When you go to fire the car, you turn the key, and remember, the engine has to turn for this to pump fuel. So you turn the key, you pump the pedal a couple times because it's been a while. By pumping the throttle here, you can squirt the accelerator pump. So that's literally squirting fuel down one bore of the carb. So you do that, grab the key, crank the key, and you'll keep until this thing is actually moving fuel through it. And for the most part, it will, because from here, everywhere behind it, there's fuel. There's no absence of fuel. Where there is an absence of fuel is potentially up in here, behind any high spots after the pump. There's potentially a shortage of fuel here, but that fills up back kind of quick. But whatever you're short in the bowl, that's what you have to replenish for you to get fuel coming back out of your carburetor, because it has to go up through all of the jets and then shoots out towards the top of each of the bores, with the exception of the idle jet, I think, is one of the bottom ones. So if you get an electric fuel pump instead, you get in the car, you turn the key to run but not start, turn it to run, and you'll hear, and the electric pump is all loaded up with fuel, and now you can rick it vroom. It's that simple, and I don't see how that's not appealing to everybody. Everyone should want exactly that. Who doesn't want rick it get vroom? It literally couldn't be any better. So reliability wise, that's kind of what we're after for all of these. You're probably asking, what's all this strap crap? Well, A few years ago, I had started lifting out my engines with straps because I had a shortage of chains. We were yanking engines out of plenty of other cars, not EXPs, mostly like Contours, Ford Contours. Yanking engines out of those, getting them around for rebuilds, all sorts of stuff. So I was out of chain, but one of my engines from a demo derby guy, it came to me wrapped up with a seatbelt. So like this, but a used seatbelt was what he used to cherry pick the engine out of his cars. He's like, well, my best tip ever is, these factory seatbelts. By law they have to be good for like over 800 pounds or something. So I just use those. Like, oh, okay, yeah, fair enough. They're nice and tidy. I give you that. And when you scrap out a car, you got plenty of seatbelt left over. But it wasn't until I ran out of chain that I had to start, improvising. And instead of using chain, I thought I would try the seatbelt thing. Every so often. So what I do for a living is I drive around trucks, shots. So kind of super duty truck. I think half-ton truck is what it would technically be, with a gooseneck trailer, and I just run equipment back and forth between a couple of dealerships. And then what we use are 2-inch straps. Oh, the nice, fairly heavy-duty stuff that's rated for, I think, 6,000 pounds, 6,000 pounds, depending on the brand of strap. But after so many uses, and then when you wrap it around some of your cargo, they just die. So you have to go out and replace them. But usually they bust on the long side. So I save, because everything you cut off you can't use. So I take the scrap that I cut off and I use it for moving engines. Well, yanking engines, I should say. But this stuff, it's great. The strap itself is rated for many thousand pounds. And what's nice is it's crazy flexible. It's easy to run in and around the engine. And because it's not chain, as you lift it up, you're not hearing the chain try to relax, and it's going clink, 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 clink. And every time it goes clink, 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 your engine goes down, 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 down. It's, I'm not fond of it, and it's an actual safety hazard when you're working with something that fills the engine bay as much as this thing does. Once this is all stripped down, it won't. It'll be a pretty simple engine install and removal if it ever needs it again. But by using the strap instead, you can wrap it around exactly how you need. There's instances where chain doesn't fit where you want it to, and chain likes to roll around when you don't want it to. And lately, some of my engine removals have been in weird situations where I can't use the engine stand because I'm out in a driveway or out in the grass. In which case, I'm using a tractor with forklift tines. Strap on forklift tines works perfect. Chain on forklift tines, that's a slippy, slidey situation you probably don't want to be in. But anyways, you're probably asking right now, okay, what's the best way to hang this guy? Well, pretty much the way you saw it. I mean, really, there's two ways of getting the engine out of an Escort or an EXP. And my preferred one is removing the valve cover, undoing all the head bolts, and then wrap. You can either grab it by hand or you can wrap your rope around it. But you can wrap your rope around the intake. So underneath the intake manifold here, under here, back up behind the fuel pump, go over the distributor, go down underneath the exhaust manifold, come back up here So then right where my fist is, you tie a knot with my 2 fingers being the strap. Tie a knot here, and then hold it over and grab your strap that it went over to the distributor, grab those 2, and then you can lift up through here. Alternatively, you can alternate it instead. So you could choose to go down here underneath the intake manifold, up behind the fuel pump, come across, go back down here underneath the exhaust manifold, back up here. A great place is between the thermostat housing and the EGR ports, that gap down there. Back up through there, and you come across diagonally, tie your knot. So now you have one strap here, and you can pinch it up right in the middle, and it stays in the middle. And the nice thing is, because it's like this, usually you can twist the engine a full 90 degrees either direction, which is fantastic for 1, when it's getting out of the car, and 2, once it's out of the car and you need to set it down. Very, very handy. But if you take the head off first, it makes the world a heck of a lot easier for you, because then you have full access to all of your accessories on the engine block itself, depending on what you need to remove. It gives you better access to your coolant hard lines, if you still have those. Things like your power steering, all of that stuff is way easier to do if you remove only the head, and of course the 2 manifolds on it. Like I said, it's actually easier to remove the intake, head, and exhaust manifold all as a trio out. But if you have high output headers, likely your exhaust manifold goes all the way underneath the engine. And that is when it's even more preferred to take the head off. Once you take the head off, your exhaust manifold can actually rotate up over the block, and then the bottom tubes will come straight out without dinging or having to remove your radiator. Because with the engine in place and you having a 4-to-1 exhaust, usually what has to happen is the exhaust comes up with the engine. Some of them end way out here, which makes getting the engine out very difficult. Or you remove the radiator. That will be in the way for a 4-to-2-to-1 header. But once the head's off, you can rotate, because the header assembly kind of looks like this. In the car, underneath the car, you rotate it up on top of the engine, and pull it out by hand. And then getting the block out is extremely easy. Just run a couple of weak, puny little straps underneath the oil pan, uppity, uppity, uppity. In theory, you could pick it up by hand, 2 guys. It's a little heavy for 1 dude. The block hit empty, so the block alone is something around 60, 70 pounds. But the bigger safety concern is it's going to be deep inside an engine bay. You don't need to mess yourself up over that. So that kind of gets things caught up. So now we can actually start going through here. And this will be a little bit of a learning experience for me, because this does have dealer AC. I've done a few of these in factory AC cars and a couple in non-AC cars. So I've done every configuration except for a turbo engine, an EFI engine, a CFI engine, and dealer AC. So we will get cracking. So if you're doing this along with me, what are you going to need for tools? You're going to need not much, and honestly, not much. So we do have a hammer. The type of hammer really isn't all that important. What would actually be preferred is a hammer with a wooden stick. You will be needing the wooden stick to pop up the pistons, okay? It's time to get those out of the block. You just need something with a wooden handle to do that. Full metric socket set of the 3/8 inch drive. You also need a number of 1/2 inch drive sockets as well, along with 1 large wrench to break free our head bolts, And then eventually our rod bolts, rod, I think they're nuts on these. Rod nuts, connecting rod nuts, and then the main crankshaft cap bolts. So we only need big wrenches for those. If your engine's out, you will have already had to remove the accessory pulley. So that's already loose. And then once we get there, you'll see. But it's up to you if you want to remove your camshaft sprocket or not. How these install into the engine is from the distributor hole. So if you intend on removing your camshaft, cam sprocket will have to come off, and that will again require either a big wrench or an impact gun. I'll show you mine. This behemoth. Plenty old now, and now they actually have the power of that inside itty bitty battery powered handguns, and I gotta say those are crazy impressive. However, with how infrequently I use it, the battery stuff really doesn't do me any favors because I don't use it enough. So then the batteries end up going to heck before I'm able to get my money out of them. So I have that to contend with. What we will also need is just a couple pry bars is all. Something small, something less small. You really won't need much. The big one is going to be primarily for, say, peeling off the oil pan when we get to it. Or separating, say, the exhaust manifold from the head or the intake manifold from the head. Just fighting sticking gaskets is really all we need the big pry bars for. And that includes taking the head off of the block sometimes. Usually just takes a little bit of persuasion for the dowel pins, but then once you're off the dowels, the head is off, easy peasy. And then the little guy kind of does the same thing. Helps us get the valve cover off and anything else that's dealing with a stuck or sticky seal. We also have pliers handy. That's honestly only going to be for some of the hoses that still remain, any of the vacuum lines that still remain and fight us. Normal set of pliers for any pinch clamps like that. Open crescent wrench for any fuel lines like that, but I'll be leaving most of that assembled. But we will separate the fuel line from the carburetor, because the carburetors, I keep those in a different place. They all get removed, set in a nice box for future use. Otherwise, that's probably about it. I don't foresee us needing anything else. Except for when we get to the oil pump itself. The oil pump has two halves to it. There's a back plate, and then there's the cast manifold for it, we'll call it. And what keeps those two together are countersunk screws, and all the ones I've seen so far I think have been Torx head screws. But we'll see if that is the case. But aside from those, every other fastener on here is just your standard 6-point. Except for the carburetor. These would normally be a size 11 millimeter 12-point. But today, someone has gone and replaced those. So that kind of makes things a little easier. Okay, so I will set the camera down and we'll get cracking. First, we'll take the timing cover off. That's going to be a couple bolts, a couple nuts. And when we'll make our way to the back, we'll start taking out some of these spark plug tubes. It's up to you or not. If you want to remove the spark plugs, you'll need to add a spark plug socket to the list of tools. It's just going to be I think it's 5/8 inch plugs for these. And then depending on what you want to do with your EGR pipe, you may need a big wrench with heat. I mean a lot of heat. Otherwise, you can cut it. So when you install a EGR block-off plate, you won't have anything coming in and out of that. But then over here at the manifold, you'll try removing that so that you can either insert a plug, or if you're first forced to cut the pipe, you can cut the pipe and then you can weld in these nuts. So you do have those two options. This other exhaust pipe here goes to a hose that goes all the way over to the smog pump. That we simply just cut the hose for. Depending on your exhaust manifold, some of this stuff will vary. This pipe could be a little further down. It could also be down in the back side of your 4-into-2-into-1 manifold. It all just depends on what you're working with, really. Okay, so yeah, we'll start with that. Once we get the cover off and our spark plug tubes, we'll go and do the vacuum lines. We'll get the carburetor off and the fuel pumps. That way the fuel lines can go. After the fuel lines are gone, we'll get rid of the valve cover. The valve cover could be removed sooner. It's just, there's a lot of debris up here and I really want to clean that out before the valve cover comes off. So, let's start cracking with that. Set this down to show. There we go. We'll do that, and then you guys might get a little bit of commentary out of me. Hopefully you don't have to look at my ugly soul. So for the timing cover, they do vary. There's ones for the 1.9s and there's ones for the 1.6s. 1.6s will look exactly like this. It'll just be the one piece, and it's the plastic is molded in the color they choose, and it's always either going to be black or blue. Okay, and then once we get far enough along, we'll stop every so often so you guys can see some of the more intricate or important details. I'll put out the disclaimer right now. If you do end up seeing my ugly head, I know my hair is quite the mess this morning. That's because I woke up at 5 o'clock and decided to do this. So, this is our timing cover. This is the hardware for it. You'll always have 2 nuts. And depending on who's been in this before, you'll have 2 or less bolts down here at the bottom. When you go to reinstall this, this bottom section really struggles to get inside the car because you're trying to get it down in here like this, and then there's all these high spots so that it's perfectly fitting around each of these manifolds, and it makes it especially hard to get in here around your accessory belts, which you could remove. But even with those removed, you're still fighting it around the pumps. You know, smog pump down in the bottom left corner, and your power steering pump in the top left corner. So fighting this down in there doesn't really work all that great. So what I often do is I will take snips or angle grinder or Dremel or something, and I will cut along this line down here, turn along this line too, so that you only have this top cover. People will say, well, you're going to lose all your ignition timing points. Honestly, they're only for reference. You tune your ignition timing to whatever you want. If you're looking for as much performance as you can, you'll crank that sucker up until it pings, and then back it off so it doesn't. Go out for a drive. Go up and down hills with heavy throttle, and if it starts pinging, you pull over, loosen it up real quick, and notch it back a little bit. Hop in the car, do it again. So essentially, you want it as advanced as much as possible and then back it off so it can never ping. Okay, you never want pre-ignition. So, if that's the case, this literally is only for reference only. You'll set it to, the book says 8 or 10, depending on the trim of your engine, for base timing. Actually even gives some instruction up top here. But the problem is the marks on the accessory pulley, that's what you use to do your timing, ignition timing. These can vary a bunch. It's all fairly sloppy. And then also, depending on if your head or your block deck were ever milled at all, that means that your camshaft is closer to your crankshaft, which means camshaft is going to be turned more or less. This also affects your ignition timing here, which you do compensate by turning this. But where was I going with that? But so you'll find intricacies. But then the biggest offender is this cover. Even when it's bolted on, it moves around. Okay, anything that moves around isn't going to be accurate. But with this off, we'll set it off to the side. We'll keep it nice and pretty because I don't have very many blue ones. Bolts, nuts we've removed. There's a few more actually, because the 2 nuts we remove, they are on these 2 standoffs, and these 2 standoffs exist on not only the 1.6s but also the 2.0 and the 1.9s. Usually the nuts will be a 10 or an 8, and then the studs themselves I thought were 11s. That's not panning out, so we'll grab a 12. You don't want to be reefing on these guys too hard. They bend very easily. And that again affects your ignition timing reading down at the crank. So, how accurate do you want to be with ignition timing? Nah. I mean, really, it's just do what it says if you have a complete factory setup here and you want optimal fuel economy. Definitely do what the book says. If you want to get your 40 miles per gallon, that's probably going to be mandatory. However, if you want optimal performance, don't do what the book says. The book isn't interested in your performance. It's interested in your fuel economy. I'm going to sit the hardware actually inside the cover so I don't lose it. Boom. Just now I'm realizing that I might not have drained the oil, so we'll get to that. Not a 15. That's peculiar. They usually are. Let's try 13, huh? There you go. Suspicious amount of water. That's interesting. There's our oil. I don't know what the heck was up with that water presence. I don't know what's up with the water presence. And that was like pure clean water. And when I had this thing, I kept it stored dry. I kept everything on this thing plugged. That nothing could get in it. Nothing could get out. Come on, drain pan. You gotta start letting oil in. So let that go. That's an alarming amount of moisture. They'll keep trickling until the cows come home too. Okay. That's really got me concerned. Good news though is if you do have water in your engine, it's always at the bottom, which means the important parts of your engine are probably okay. But we'll see if that's actually the case here. I have my worries. I have my doubts. So right now, I'm taking off the accessory pulley, and then it comes with this gargantuan washer and then a large bolt. We're going to thread that in so that I can turn the engine over by hand. And I know when I yanked this engine, it did turn over, and then before I yanked the engine, it did run. It ran quite well. It ran like a well-documented at 150,000 mile engine ought to run. Good, the oil pan's finally taking. Someone was using it for some crazy crap, and that's why the inlet was kind of plugged. Yeah, and she still turns, so we'll be okay. There we go. Broke the camshaft bolt free. That's just something I want to do towards the beginning here. Because trying to do that when you remove the timing belt, whew, that's very difficult. That really won't get you far at all. Well, let's insert spark plug boots. Maybe I have a spark plug puller. Or a spark plug boot puller, I should say. Then again, maybe I don't. Probably don't. Then I'm thinking of Dad's, which of course would be at his place. Looking around all the wrong places, looking around. Nope, I don't know, and that's okay. We can live with that. We're going to grab some big pliers. But again, maybe not. I thought they were nearby. There we go. These are properly greased. They probably won't fight so hard, but look down on them and dry as a bone. Spend all day just yanking freaking plug wires. Enough to make the engine move. That's in there good. Not just the pans. Also a fool. There we go. Those do for one to go easy. So now, if you plan on putting this back in pronto, you want to know what the orders of which these were, okay? I, however, do not need that information. So what I'm going to do instead for you is show you proper timing here by just removing the distributor. This had to go anyways. Plus, with it off, I can show you how it should be. It's really nice when they are numbered. Some of the plug wire manufacturers will actually pre-number them for you, but you still have to know where to put them. It's just, when you're doing this, you can say remove the distributor like I'm doing and leave all the wires attached, which is what I recommend either way. But with them being numbered, you will have number 1 set to go in number 1, number 2 for number 2, 3 for 3, 4 for 4. So, should be on threading. There we go. There we go. Oops, there we go. Okay, so here's our distributor. All right. I don't want to lose the bolts for it, but I probably will. Our distributor will look like this. Now, before you start taking notes, disregard the vent, the tube, okay? There's always going to be a capped vent, and it's going to be in a different location depending on the manufacturer of your distributor cap, okay? Never base off of that. What you do want to base off of are the mounting ears, okay? Notice one is square. Please get that in your skull. One is square, one is round. Ergo, they will not interchange, meaning this cannot be installed upside down. So, with it as such, square one here, okay? The plug going nearest the square one is cylinder 1, okay? So we got 1, okay? And then number 2, okay? Let's do it with me. Number 1 by the square, 2 is the next one, okay? Then, here's where things get a little crazy. 3 is above the square, all right? And then 4 is the one nearest the round. So with our 2 mounting ears here and here, square down here, round up here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. You got that? Feel like Dark Helmet. Everybody got that? So, I'll set this aside. I'm going to gather up all my plug wire holders. They are very hard to come by should you need to replace them. So, by not losing them, we're going to do better. This is going to go over to the box. Back in the box. Back in the box. Back in the toy. Alright, good. So that's in the box, full of all the other distributors along my wall. Okay. Put our 8mm back. Okay. Getting a lay of the land here, what's next? Probably vacuum lines, then we'll deal with the carburetor. So vacuum lines, label whatever you need to label, but if you're taking the engine out of one car, putting it in a different car, labels might not be all that useful in the end anyways. However, if you can label it, you can, it will go far away. I am in the middle of photographing all of the stock vacuum diagrams for each of these cars. I believe I have every single one ever for any of these cars. So I'm trying to get those around because I too have been struggling to find them. Because a lot of my cars have been repainted or have so many miles that, so with them being repainted, the factory diagram sticker that would be on the radiator core support of the car, that would be missing. Or you have so many miles that that's just worn off or melted or whatever, what have you. Okay, let's see here. So what you have on the car may not be usable. That's usually what the case is for me on every single one of these. I think I only have out of 22 cars, get this, only like 4 usable vacuum diagram stickers. And it's just crazy. And I have 20-some cars, so you imagine I have every variation possible. And I'm kind of confident I do. So with that said, whenever I'm doing any kind of engine swap, engine removal, engine rebuilding, and then I need to know what each variation is and know how to reach the iteration I need, especially when every car is different. Furthermore, some of the cars I get will already have half of the engine swap done for me. And they won't have labeled everything or anything at all. That makes the job tricky as well. So, that alone, well, I shouldn't say alone, but those couple things have made it very pertinent. I figure out the proper vacuum routing for all of these said cars. I don't expect to memorize every single diagram by heart. That's unrealistic and unnecessary. I, however, do expect to maintain diagrams for every single one. So, what I had just done now is I had finished removing all of the vacuum lines from underneath the intake manifold. That's now because this whole spider web of vacuum lines was occupying all the space on the backside of the head. You couldn't really see where all this goes. You couldn't see the trees through the forest. Or you can see the forest through the trees. But now that's all gone, you can actually see each of these here. This is one of the thermal vacuum switches. Here's another. Depending on your intake manifold, you will have 1, 2, or 3 of these guys. This one only has the 2. Oftentimes you'll see a third one occupying this port. That might be a factory AC thing. Don't quote me on that, okay? They do vary. And then this is the first time I've ever seen this. None of my other engines are like this, where there's some sort of vacuum switch here. Or one-way check valve, or a diaphragm. It's something along those lines. And I don't know what it is because I've never had one. Or at least never in this location. It does look familiar. I think I've seen it on the tops of transmissions. But oftentimes you would get it confused with this. So this is a kind of one-way valve. Open and close of vacuum shutoff valve. This is mounted up top by the carburetor, usually right between the carb and the fuel pump, right beside the fuel pump. And that runs, I believe, the purge valve for the evap canister, if I'm correct. All right, but with all those gone and tended to, the engine's much easier now. And that brings me to another point of contention. If you have no air conditioning, you don't need all of those vacuum lines. You only need, I think you only need 2, honestly, if you've gotten rid of the other emissions like the smog pump. That's where most of your vacuum lines are being bogarted. But if you don't have smog pump and you don't have AC, your only vacuum lines would be one of these 3 here off of the carb will power the distributor, vacuum advance, but that's only if you have vacuum advance. And you will have one going to the air box, and that just controls the open and closing of the air box. If you choose to have that disconnected, your air box will be open all the time, and that's fine if you have a summer car. If you have a winter car, you do want that open close. That flap door is for the preheater. So the heat that your exhaust manifold makes when it's freezing out will be routed. You're not routing exhaust itself, but the heat, the hot air from above this guy is maintained inside the shield, goes up through a small corrugated metal tube into your air box. And then once your engine has achieved a certain level of temperature inside the air box, there's a thermal valve inside the air box. Once that has reached something like 96 degrees, so if you hold it in your hand, you can actually measure the vacuum of what it was cold versus warm. You'll see it open and close like a thermostat inside your cooling system when you put it in a pot of cold versus boiling water. You'll see it open and close. So by that opening and closing, the door will switch between hot air and cold air. So that's why I say if you only drive it in the summer, well, you can have it permanently stuck to cold air. That's not going to be a problem at all. What else? So we've removed all the vacuum lines. Next point of contention is probably going to be the EGR tube, and then I can move on to the exhaust. You see I also have the starter dangling here, and I need to address that sooner or later. The reason why I didn't do it in the car is because I was struggling to get access to that grounding bolt. And then on some of these, it's always the later cars, unless someone's changed out the starter. But on the end of the starter, there's usually a threaded hole on the starter. I think one of these guys has it. It'd be a threaded hole somewhere on the back. Here it is. So a threaded hole next to the embossment for the main shaft. And like I said, it's only on the later starters. And there'd be a itty bitty little steel, very thick steel, because it's a very heavy starter, that hangs the starter off of an embossment on the block. I think that right there, unless I'm mistaken. But it hangs it onto the block. So if you get rid of your giant steel coolant hardline hanging bracket, you can still mount the starter with that extra support. I do recommend having that extra support. Otherwise, you have a lot of weight on the starter being held on by 3 bolts, which you would think would be plenty. But it just weighs so much, and the engine can shake a bunch. So now you got this 25, 30 pound starter kind of just shimmering there, or shimmying. So whatever vibrations you can reduce, the better. All right, so yes, I said we'd work on the EGR. I have big adjustable wrenches. If you find yourself tending to that, you're going to need them as well. I don't have the biggest ones ever, but I do got big ones. So I'll grab those. And I'm pretty sure I mentioned these earlier. Otherwise, I should still have all the tools I need, which is no more than I had mentioned already. Here we go. Cool. So normally you would want to heat the crap out of these nuts with a torch. If your car is low enough mileage and isn't too rusty, this part may go extremely easy for you. But I doubt it. So you can see that I'm moving the nut, and that's cool. However, the EGR pipe itself, it's dying. That's what you hear cracking and splintering. So that's fine. I wasn't going to use that anyways. I just don't want to have to bust out the angle grinder and make a whole lot of noise on camera. I had to cut that off. But if this doesn't break clean, we'll have to do that anyways. Well, she's giving her what for. Mushrooming the thing. Okay, so I will keep turning this until I hear it snap off completely. So I ain't gonna use it. if I have to, I will find a new one. There, boom. You can see it from there, maybe you can't, but it tore. So our exhaust manifold is no longer connected to our intake manifold. And that is the goal. Not to toot my own horn, that's actually also kind of ideal. We want that crap down. So now, bring the camera over so I know that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So this was our EGR port. It had sheared. Get that out of the way. Now, this woven sock, this heat shield thing, should be careful with that. I think it's supposed to be cloth, but I really think it's fiberglass. So if you brush your arm up against the exposed, the frayed ends, I think you will get fiberglass rash burns on you. Because we were yanking this engine, and it took a long time because it's got all these accessories on it and the automatic transmission. Aye. So we'd spent a lot of time on this, and by the time we were done, when it finally went inside and enjoyed our time away from this thing, we sat down and we both started getting nasty rashes up and down our arms. And there was no poison ivy or anything of that present. We were doing this literally right there. So the only explanation I have is that possibly being fiberglass. All right, so our next step is going to be removing the exhaust manifold, like I said. But what I'm going to do first is gather up that drain bolt for the oil pan. So now that it's empty, I'm going to spin this around so that you can see each aspect I'm doing a little easier here. And I'm not worried about tightening that up because I'm not going to fill it with oil. That thing is going to get sandblasted before any oil goes back on. So I'll set this back down. Double check that you can actually see some stuff. Cool. All right. So let's get this oil off to the side. Here we go. Oil's out of here. The spare tire I was using to hold it up, out of here. Alright, I used force spilled oil. It was soiled. Throw that away. Crank the engine over so that you can see it. Like so, right? Right. Yes. Yes, now things are coming together. Okay, so as far as the manifolds go, everything is basically going to be a 13. Unless there's some sort of like tiny heat shield bolt or nut, I should say. Basically everything's going to be a 13. And depending on your exhaust manifold, access might be poor. And depending on how your alternator positioning is, you may find that in the way for some of your bolts as well. Same said with whatever AC compressor you have. But for this one here today, I appear to have full unhindered access. Kind of wish I had, because I'm out in the garage, detached garage away from the house. Kind of wish I had gone and grabbed batteries for my little impact guns. Little impact guns are extremely handy for stuff like this. You know, if you have like little construction impact, you know, electric impact guns, battery powered ones, is what I'm referring to. Actually makes this go pretty quick. Once you loosened everything with the wrench, you come along with your gun, and then your stuff's nice and loose. The next thing I want to point out here is, because I'm sure some people will bring it up, why aren't you heating all these nuts and studs and bolts? Because you don't need to. Okay, you can see how easy they've been coming out for me so far. I have yet to hear of any kind of case where someone snaps one of these studs off. That just doesn't happen. The aluminum of the head is going to give out far sooner than these thick steel studs, which are, they're appropriately sized for this application. Usually the issue is they use studs that are way too small for whatever the heck they're doing. So that means the studs break before your friction breaks. But on these are properly sized, so the friction bond busts before you have any chance of the fasteners giving out. And you can see so far, for the most part, it's just been effortless. That's usually the case when these are so oil caked. Whenever they're soaked in oil this much, they're almost always easy freaking peasy. There, and we will save all of these. They're easily lost, and when you go to put them back in, you will have to find yourself two types. You'll have the brown rusty ones that are usually pretty short, and then you will have nice clean ones that are usually pretty long. The short ones are always for the exhaust manifold, because the intakes on all of these North American CVHs are cast aluminum. Aluminum. So being cast aluminum, those manifolds are mighty thick, as opposed to this one is cast steel. And then when they're not cast steel, they're going to be the steel tubular headers. And as you do these, you'll be noticing, even just watching me do it, that for the most part, it's the entire stud that's coming out of the head. That just demonstrates what I said earlier, that usually the first thing to go is going to be the friction with the head, not the bolt's tensile strength. Like I said, especially when they're so soaked in oil. But of course, these are meant to be studs, not bolts. So when this gets reassembled, I will first take all the nuts off of all these studs, so that the studs can go in all the way. Because it is ideal if these are studs, not, bolts. Because with them being studs, it's easier to hang the exhaust manifold when you're in the car. You're going to see that here as I remove the last fastener, and then the exhaust manifold will still hang in place, solely because I was able to remove one of the nuts while leaving the stud behind. So now I have the stud to actually hang that in place. But the bigger thing is not so much the exhaust manifold, but the gasket between the manifold and the head. Those studs are going to be the only thing holding your gasket on. So now with that dangling there, let's okay, let my starter dangle down like that. Take our exhaust manifold off. Here's the shape of our gasket. You can see it's torn right here. Some of that's from me removing it, but it had been torn like that for a little while. Not many miles, because there's not much for scorch marks. But it has been like that for a little while. Set that to the side. Yeah. Here's where we get to see some glory. There's actually a lot of fresh oil right here, which is weird. So it's making me think that there is a valve stem issue, or a valve stem seal issue, I should say. Possibly a valve guide issue here, but usually just the stem seal. This one is wet with oil on the inside, and then it's oozing down underneath. But it could also be from head gasket failure, which I don't think is the case with this guy. It turns over really good, which is irrelevant, but when it ran really good. But usually the case is, you can see it's all caked up with oil. Up here, it goes down into the spark plug tube holes. They actually have drain ports underneath every single one. So anything that gets down inside these will come out these drain holes, and it'll drip down right beside the exhaust manifold. So that can make your exhaust kind of smoky. All right. Since we have all that off, I'm going to gather these up. Don't want to lose your heat shield if you plan on driving it in the winter. It also makes your cast steel or cast iron header look a lot better. If you have a two-wheeler header, it's up to you if you want to keep it or not. The heat shield for the two-wheeler headers on the 1.9 headers, it's very decorative. It matches the valve cover and the intake manifold. But for the two-wheeler headers of the 1.6s, it looks like a giant aluminum cod piece. So I won't beat you down for removing it because it looks funny. Boy, it looks funny. And if you're the type to wrap your headers, there's that too, you know. Whatever the heart wants. All right, so get that away from the camera, then it won't make noise for you. I'm going to remove the starter now. It's going to be this bolt. And part of why I didn't remove it before is because on this dealer AC, you can see there's this giant bracket that connects that bolt to the AC compressor. And that's why this whole compressor is here too. There wasn't an easier way for me to remove all of that at one go. But now with it here in front of me, you can do something about that. And yeah, it looks like a 17. Because it is. We'll see how tight this is. If I have to grab the bigger inches, I will. Yeah, I don't think that'll be too bad. These never are, but because it's got this AC compressor attached to it, I make no reservations. Anytime I'm doing engines, it's like a booked hotel. No reservations. Alright, so with that loose, just wiggle this some to get the starter out of here. Because it's dealer AC with that giant bracket is hanging up my starter, but I got it off. It's on the ground. Now every bolt you remove from the block, at least these big ones where it's only going to be onesie twosies, it's smart to thread it back into the block. So we're going to do that after I remove the next bolt down. If you can't see it, don't worry. I'll grab the camera in a second here, but I think you'll be all right. So by loosening that, get the hanger out of the way. This is a block heater. We're going to leave that intact because this engine is going into another winter car. Thread our bolt back in just enough so that's still there and obvious that a bolt is there. There we go. And now you can see most of the action. So the bolt was just right down here, and then the one for the AC compressor beside it. Okay, so now I think I'm ready to get rid of my alternator and compressor combo. getting sick of that hanging in there because it's in the way, and it's a good chunk of weight. But now that I got most of the stuff disconnected from it, it's not going to be too heavy, which will make removing it easier. So let's evaluate this here. I've never inked one of these. I expect a bunch of hidden fasteners. So far, that's kind of what I'm seeing. Okay, so that coolant hanger isn't held on by anything right now. Shoe. We will get that done by removing a hose clamp or two. Again, didn't remove it earlier because each of these hose clamps were positioned as such, because you can see the angle of my wrench at the least. This is obviously in the way of the exhaust manifold. So this wasn't going to happen with any sort of ease, especially with the radiator in place. And the radiator had to stay in place because it's an automatic transmission car. Why is that so important? Well, because in the ATX cars, they have transmission oil, transmission fluid cooler lines that go into the radiator, and those lines, part of them are hard, part of them are rubber. There's actually a couple parts of rubber on them. But with them being each, I couldn't remove them. That becomes the chore with some of these weird option cars. You want to remove some of the stuff, but due to how it is shaped or arranged, you can't do it in the order you want to. So we got that banged out. I still have the rear bolt that are hard coolant lines are hanging off of. Maybe it is a 15. Looks like 13 because it is. So I gotta get that off the back here, and then our coolant hard lines will be gone. Then once I have this off, you'll be able to see how crazy this bracket is. And you'll see how bare the engine is on the back side with this got. I just have this kind of dangling in the air, and it weighs so much, it's putting a lot of strain on the bolt I was removing. But I have that down and off. I'll thread my bolt back in. We'll grab our bracket, and now this isn't even the entirety of the bracket. There's normally a big heavy steel piece that goes right in between these two here. And that usually weighs a buttload. Drain what little coolant is in this thing out. Set that to the side, so that won't ever be using that. And I should say, whenever I remove these coolant lines, I go and replace them with hose. Because there's two things. With hose, it's lighter. Okay, so we have that. You know, we're not saving much weight by changing metal for rubber. But we can reroute it any which way we want. Also, anytime there's a steel coolant line, that means there's two pieces of hose going into it. And the more hose sections you have, the more chance of coolant leaks you have. It's not the length of hose, it's how many hose connections. By me changing out two chunks of hoses for one, you know, I've cut my chances of leaks in half. Not to mention when they do eventually leak, I've made it much more serviceable because I've rerouted it all. Changing out the hose elbows on those hard pipes anywhere I showed you is really difficult. So the rear steel hanger for that is right here. Mounts onto this little bolt. I thread that back in place. I don't think I'll end up using it ever again, but it's here so that when I do strip the block completely, get it ready for sandblasting, I'll know what it's there for. And then in this bottom corner, there was a bolt here that I had already removed, but that was holding the front steel hanger. So now I'll remove this top one here, and that should allow the entire bracket to pivot forward. And that's assuming there's a bolt left, and there is. There's one bolt hiding way down in there. So we'll just leave that until this whole outfit pivots down forward, and then I'll have much better access with a wrench. So we'll set this down. Normally, you'll have unhindered access with just your normal sockets. But for me to do that lower one, I'll have to grab a ratcheting wrench. But before we resort to that, I'm pretty confident I can do this first one without nothing. Oh, maybe not. Oh well. We'll grab a couple of wrenches. I know this top one's going to be 17. The bottom one looks like a 19. Maybe an 18. With these cars, you never know, especially when you're dealing with the dealer stuff. Get a fastener and roulette. So we got my 17. Another 17 in case I need braking. Sadly, I don't have a ratcheting 19. I do have a ratcheting 18, so grab that. Again, just in case. Alright. So I know this top one's 17, so we'll start with that. Yep. I had a feeling it would be like that. We'll get it started without the ratchet first. Not confident in the grip, so we're going to grab a normal wrench. Ah, the joys of AC. Here's a plate 17. Good. Put those down. Hopefully the clanking of those wrenches isn't making you guys deaf or anything. That would be a shame and embarrassing for me. That was on there about as hard as I expected. It feels already kind of finger loose. My finger access in here is actually pretty decent. And just like I said, for any of the oddball hardware going into the block, anything going into the head, we will set aside because it's going to find its way back there eventually as well. So now, we'll see if I can squeeze my 18 or my 19 in there. Okay, wire for compressor, clutch engagement. It looks like a 19. Well, maybe it is 17 or an 18. No, there's a slot. Okay. Yeah, that turned nice and easy. I like that. I'm down with that. Okay, so you can see it's tipping out already. I think I'll tip it like this. Kind of gives me the best access I can manage here. And then this bolt, it's going to be trapped in the bracket because the slot for this is so thin I can barely fit my wrench in there. Like I can fit the thickness of my wrench in half. So the bolt will just stay in its hole. It'll stay with this bracket. And that's fine by me. That means the bolt isn't going to get lost. And two, it's going to stay with what it goes into. which is probably more important than anything else. But then once I get this far enough out, I'll have to use both hands. Be careful here because this combination will get heavy, and maybe that's where leaving this back bracket on would have been clever. But I think we'll be all right. My guesstimation is this only being about 20-25 pounds. Here we go. We're at the end now. Aha! And you can see the engine. Oh! Oh yeah. Aggressively tilt the other direction. That means we're headed in the right direction. So now, let's take a look, see what your view is of things. Pretty good, pretty good. Can I do one better? Yeah. Yeah, that's one better. Okay, let's gather up our excess of wrenches. Spin this thing around because it's time to work on the carburetor and the intake manifold before this thing tips over. Oh, spinny, spinny. Oop. Yep, my stand's mount is already like, hey, what the heck? Stop this. It's real funny because there's honestly not much weight in the whole intake manifold. Alright, good. So, with kind of like that, you should have a decent view of things. Oh yeah, you get a whole lay of the land. Alright, so we'll get our block heater out of the way. We'll leave that dangling over the thermostat. Actually, we'll dangle that over the engine stand. Thermostat housing will stay with the head. So that'll disappear together. So I have a bracket here. This is for the throttle kick down of the, which maybe throttle kick down is the wrong word, but it's some sort of kick down shaft for the transmission. When you floor it, this pivots and there's a rod that connects from this down to the transmission. It tells the transmission, hey, we're requesting full throttle. Let's kick her down a gear or two. So it does that. So all this bracketry is unique to the automatics. So I will be removing this all and extracting it for whatever car that the automatic will be going into. But for now, it's just going to stay on the intake manifold. But being it's connected to the carb as it always is, it's just, I had forgotten. All my EXPs except for one are manual transmissions. So they don't have this extra bracketry. And it is easy enough to remove. Push it down, rotate it out, and then boom, there it is. Maybe I will do that. Yeah, we'll do that. So I want to get around all my automatic stuff. So I don't want it lost, misplaced, missing. So we'll do that. We'll get the carb off, and then unless I can do it now, we'll take this little bracket off of the carburetor. We'll be able to put that with the automatic linkage, and then we can just plug away on the intake manifold. It looks like a 15. I can't fit that there. Shallow wall 15. It looks more like a 13 now. We will try every socket today. Even if I have to try them more than once. Okay, well, tell you what, I can fit an open-end wrench in there, but I'm not really big on that. So what we're going to do is grab our 1/4 inch drive socket set. But being I know it's 13, it means I only have to grab the one socket. That's really going to save my bacon here. Grab that. Grab one of my cool socket wrenches. You guys will like how this looks. Check that out. We got a swivel guy. These things are pretty cool. I like them a lot. That's righty tighty, lefty loosey. Alright, so I was hoping I'd be able to fit this inside the whole shaft, but that's a tad smaller than a 1/4 inch. So all this has to go back, and I'll just have to bite the bullet, grab an orange wrench. There we go. We put our sockets back. We're not barbarians. Grab a normal 13 and a ratchet. I don't want to have to make more trips back here. Can go. Alright, so ratcheting first. Yep, too big. We ain't lucky. Little guy first. Okay, let's see. I don't know how these guys tighten this down from the factory. I don't see a good way of this panning out. There we go. You have to move. That's a really good start. Tell that drain bolt to stop dripping water, dang it. Let's move again. This is quickly becoming an annoyance. I'm glad I don't keep any of this automatic stuff. So it makes me feel like Eric Clapton. I can't stand it. This running around. I can't stand it. It's burning me down. This is top tier content, I'll tell you what. A guy going to town on this itty bitty freaking washer that you can't even see. And he's given the craziest commentary you've ever heard on any kind of car channel. He's had to resort to busting out a chisel to make him the nut go around. But we did get it loose enough so that the bracket's loose enough so that I can actually use the closed end of the combo wrench. Good grief, this is silly. When you see all this stuff, it's like, oh man, really feel bad for the automatic guys. There's so much you're going to have to do to manual swap it. Think of how great it's going to be afterwards, because you'll never have to do this again. And actually, if you have a manual car, that this doesn't need to go. It can just stay here. But I need it to go because I don't know how many spares of these I have. But I need to make sure that all my automatic stuff stays together. Because there's those of you out there who want to automatic swap for one reason or another. You will be needing all of this special hardware. It's not much really, just some of the linkage that goes from the carburetor to the transmission. As you see here, it's a little funky, very finicky. Okay. Of course, I'm not old. I don't claim to be. But repetitive little actions like this in a cramped space make your hands cramp up something fierce. I got that out a bunch. Maybe I can sneak my ratcheting one here. Ease the pain. No, pain not eased. And of course, the gear head, wrench heads are bigger than Pittsburgh's. You can complain about the quality of Pittsburgh tools. That's fine, I get that. Generally, as quality goes, you get what you pay for. However, on these very affordable wrenches, you will find that the heads are a lot thinner side to side and front to back. That allows you to get these into more places that no gear wrench, snap-on wrench, what have you, ever can. And I guarantee that. I did go to tech school, and oh yeah, everyone's there is obsessed with the snap-on and Matco guys. That's fine. I love my tools too. But I gotta say, I work on small stuff. And everything I do, it's almost always in a cramped environment. And I need my tools to get into places, tight places like this. If this wrench was any bigger, I wouldn't be able to do this. And they're like, yeah, well, whatever, you know, you're literally going to school for power sports like the rest of us, so name a time in power sports where you'll need a smaller wrench. I'm like, okay, wait and see. So eventually we get to the outboard section of class, because power sports in college encompasses the marine environment as too. So boats, that includes inboard and outboard marine propulsion devices. And we had to learn how to remove gear sets inside lower units. There we go. Get that threaded on there without crossing it. And deep inside most of the gearboxes in the transom of your lower unit on your outboards or inboards or what have you, you have to get in there with a really small wrench. Because they're extremely aerodynamic. That means that your working space is minimal. Well, my classmates with their snap-on and Matco wrenches, they literally couldn't fit wrenches in there. And even our shop teacher, he had a full, he had the snap-on everything. Everything you could possibly get, he had it. His stuff wouldn't fit either. So I'm like, well, check this out. I grabbed one of my Pittsburgh wrenches because I know these being more affordable, that they are thinner in like every dimension. But they still fit fasteners perfectly fine. You know, it's hard to screw up a simple wrench. As long as it fits the fastener and doesn't bend or break when you're using it, you have a good one. So I sneak it in there with its narrow head, and it was big. It had to be like a 17 or 19 millimeter size wrench to go in there and loosen up the nuts at the bottom of the drive shaft, holding one of the bevel gears on. I think it was this exact one, my 17 Pittsburgh. And it was the only one that would fit in there, height-wise, and then wasn't too wide because the front of that gear case. So about 17, I grabbed one, and that's when I left. The front of the gearbox is tapered. So you can only fit so wide, and because of how the gear system is designed, you can only fit so tall. My Pittsburgh wrench was literally the only thing in the building that would get in there and loosen that bolt, the nut. So that's wild, you know. But it just goes to show, any tool you can fit in your arsenal is one worth keeping. Just because you have something that's more expensive doesn't mean you necessarily have an upgrade. Because if someone brags about something being sturdy and strong because it's big and bulky, know that you're going to have a lot of size limitations because what you have is a big and bulky. Big and bulky doesn't do squat. It just gets in the way and it's harder on your hands the longer you're wrenching on whatever you're touching. So, yeah, it's always fun. Alright, so our automatic linkage is removed. We now move on to this EGR pipe. Since you can see, I can move it back and forth. It's pretty loose. It's the whole bung that's moving. What I'm gonna do here is bend this down. Let's try to. Because later, I'll remove this later. It will unthread from the manifold quite easily. But we'll do that later. Because the engine's going to be in the way of this turning over, being I'm not cutting off the pipe right now. So that means we can go back to getting the carburetor off. To remove the carb, like I said earlier, it's usually size, well, from the factory they're 11 millimeter 12 point. But on here, someone replaced it for hex heads, which are apparently 12s now. You can't remove them with a socket wrench, it has to be hand wrenches. Let's grab our 12 and report back to you guys. And the reason why it has to be a manual wrench is because that you have a nasty height restriction here. If you don't have this throttle kick down that keeps snagging my wrench, we'll do this. Show me I can turn the gear now. Yeah. So if you don't have that, this one right here is typically the only one you can actually ever access with a socket, but it has to be a 1/4 inch drive. You have to have a bunch of wobblers. It has to be short well. It has to be thin walled. And it's still a chore to get out. All these other ones, there's some amount of carburetor over the nut and stud, which makes moving them difficult. And then this is nice. This one here, as I loosen the nut, it's taking the stud out with it. It's fine. I'll tend to that later. We'll just focus on getting this off. Or as loose as we can, I should say. Because, like I said, being the carburetor hovers over each of these studs and nuts, you typically can't remove them until all of them are loose. And once all of them are loose, because you work around one at a time. Loose as you can, loose as you can, loose as you can, loose as you can. Now you can lift it up, and then you can loose out, loose out, loose out, loose out, all the way around. Just how it goes with these. It's not hard, it's just slow. If you're doing this in the car though, that's hard. You have my sympathy if you're doing this in the car. That is hard. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because, like I said, the only way to get at these, especially the front ones, is with a manual wrench by itself. And the only way to do it is at this steep angle that you can see here, unless you remove the valve cover, and even then, still you find yourself colliding with the rockers. And it's 12 points, so the closed end has to go on there, and you can only get a couple turns out of it each direction, or a couple degrees each direction. That makes working on them difficult as well. Them being the 6-sided ones, the challenge isn't much better. The great thing is you can use the open side of the wrench. So if you're thinking about changing it out, experiment with both. Figure out which you like best. This is like my 3rd or 4th time dealing with hex heads. I don't mind them when they're on an engine stand like this, but when they're in the car, they're kind of a bear. Because what I do like about the 12 points is, sure, it's hard to get your wrench around them, but once you've moved them the once or twice, the couple 2-degree arches you are able to make with these, you can actually get in there with your finger, and you can turn them like thumb wheels pretty good, assuming that you've lubricated the crap out of them, because that helps too. If you can keep these well lubricated, that helps a bunch. It'll make your day a lot easier. But with that being said, the next biggest thing is making sure you're not tightening these down too hard. So if you tighten these down too hard, you can't get a wrench in there to get good bite, and then you end up stripping them. You don't want that. Also, if you do have the 12 millimeter or the 11 millimeter 12-point nuts on these, you can't fit a ratcheting wrench around them at all. And even if you did, there's not enough side-by-side access on the front too for you to even consider using a ratchet wrench on these. So, yeah, I get it. These can be a chore. And it gets worse the bigger the carb you use. I should say that too. So the bigger the carb, because a bigger carb is essentially what a bigger carb is. It's going to have bigger bores, and for the bores to be bigger, that means the bowl has to be enlarged. And then because your bores are bigger, you're using more air. If you're using more air, that means you're using more fuel. Ergo, you use enough fuel, you can drain the bowl faster than you fill it. So, carb designers, they make the bowls big enough for, let's say, 120% fuel demand. So more than you'd ever realistically need. That way you don't run out. So with that demand being required, the floats are naturally bigger for that aspect as well. Or the float bowls are bigger to accommodate that as well. So then you end up having this ginormous carb, and it still has this itty bitty mounting footprint that the stock one has. So you have to be conscientious. If you feel you have really good carburetor access, go for it. If you don't, and you only drive it during the summer, buy carbs. Do that. Get yourself some CV carbs, a rack of 4 of them, or any other kind of custom intake system you want to try or create, or if you want to use, there's manifolds out there, old ones, very old, from the 80s and 90s, that will have a pair of 2-barrel Webers on them, and they can be either side drafts like that, or they can be down drafts like that. For North American cars, you can use either, but if you use the side drafts, you won't have much room for air filters. So the downdraft ones I personally would recommend, just from a practicality standpoint. Because the more room you have for a filter, the more filter options you have, which means you're spending less time hunting for parts and more time driving. So now I'm back to the nut I had started on, but now that the whole carburetor is loose, I can raise this up every so often to help my access. When, if you haven't noticed by now, yes, it is slow. So then you start asking yourself, well, if this is what the maintenance is like, how often do you need to be doing this? Well, how often do you take care of your vehicle? If you're keeping your carburetor nice and clean, if you're using a decent spacer underneath, once this carb is off, I'll show you what the spacer deal is all about. Early spacers have issues. The early ones are multi-piece. They're 3-piece. They come, and they're all like kind of glued or laminated or melted together, something to that extent. They come apart, and then you'll have some nasty vacuum leaks that are pretty hard to diagnose. But aside from that, as long as you're using decent fuel and not storing the car for months on end without stabilizer, you won't have any issues. But if your budget is such that you can change carbs, it could certainly be worth your time. Your performance is always worth your time. The question is, how much does it monetarily cost? But if you've had to do this more than once in your time of ownership, it might be worth an upgrade. And again, I would recommend checking into something like the bike carbs instead of just a simple direct carb replacement. So here's what's interesting here, fellas. I have a perfectly stock carb spacer, and this is one without a heater element, which is kind of rare. Usually have the heater element. But what I noticed is this is a replacement. This is genuine Ford, but it's a replacement, and a very high quality one. And it's not original to this engine. This has an E2 part number, and this is an 81 engine. So E2 would only be 82 or newer. And with it being an E2, it's most likely late 82 or newer. Good, we're still clicking along. But this one is molded in one single piece. Usually how these are is each ring is one separate piece, and then the plastic around it is another piece. Sometimes you'll have a lamination on top and one on the bottom, or only one or the other, sometimes neither. But anytime there's a laminated unit, some of these will even be felt. It'll be a compressed felt or fiber material, and they swell up with time and die. But the multi-piece plastic ones are kind of like a Bakelite almost. Over time, they crack from all the heat, temperature expansions. And then they will vacuum leak between the two, which isn't a big problem. But usually to the outside, and that's a huge problem. This is the last thing you want. But this is a really nice replacement. And now, that is the first one I've ever seen of those in person. So now that I have one, I have a part number, I'm able to look those up and hopefully secure a few more for myself. So, most of these cars will have the factory intake system. You know, one carb going into the four cylinders. But I am hoping to take most of them and do bike carb conversions to most. But it's only as the budget allows, and well, my budget isn't all that impressive. So now that the carb is off, we'll work on getting the fuel line off so the carb can be free. What am I looking here? Here we go. These are a wee bit overkill, but they're still going to work. Anything worth doing is worth overdoing, so they say. Okay, that is resisting. Bingo. That was his name-o, in case you were wondering. Bingo was his name-o. Okay, so we got our fuel lines separated from each other for the most part. So now we're able to do this funky freaking maneuver to thread our fuel filter from the braided fuel line. This is by no means the only way to do it. This is by no means the best way to do it, but it is a way of doing it without having to grab a bunch of wrenches. Spend a lot of time on camera wrenching. And now that I got my swivel fitting to move freely, we'll remove it like so. Set our carburetor off to the side. That will be coming in handy later. So wrench off to the side. Okay, so now we get to start working on the intake manifold. So just like the exhaust manifold, we had mentioned it earlier, it's going to be a bunch of 13s, and I know from prior experience that access to some of the middle nuts is poor. I get that. They're sometimes quite poor, especially the middle two. The middle two are the worst. And the bigger your intake is, the harder that is, by the way. So just know it don't get better. Due to this intake pattern and this particular fuel pump is in the way of my top left intake manifold nut. So we're just going to remove the fuel pump via 13s. Hopefully there's enough room here for ratcheting wrenches, as well as fingers once you have it loose enough. So time-wise, I like to think we're doing pretty good here. You've been watching me doing this for about 2 hours now, in real time, mind you. And that's me doing everything the slow way, by hand. And then at the same time, stopping to explain and show each of the more detailed components. A funky sludge up in here. That's great. Okay, good. So we got our fuel pump and fuel push rod out. Those are getting set aside. I do not reuse mechanical fuel pumps. They go straight to the trash. So I have my ratcheting 13. We'll just start going to town on the intake manifold. So you can imagine if I had all of the electric tools I've mentioned earlier, this could be going a lot much faster. And of course, if I wasn't showing and explaining everything to you guys, we'd be moving along quicker as well. Now, just like the carburetor, a couple of these intake manifold bolts or nuts, depending on how they come apart. If they come apart as studs, then you're really in a jam. Boy, this one's in there good. They normally aren't like this. I think someone's had this head off. These two inner ones, it's surrounded by the two center intake ports. At least this one is. So if this one comes out as a stud, it's going to stay with the manifold until I can get some vice grips on the other side. But if it comes out as a nut, the nut will just fall off.
and sit inside this little tray that holds water on the stock cars, which is problematic. I recall the 1.9s it being a different shape and less prone to holding whether it's water or oil or coolant. It's not a cavity, it's just a tray. It's casting on the top, and like this little pocket here. There's a pocket like that up in between the middle runners, and it's very prone to holding debris and liquids. And the liquids don't drain because there's no drain. There's nowhere for them to go. So they just pose various problems as time goes on. Okay. Goes there. We'll get most of these ones started, and then I'll bust out the normal socket wrench for them. Fun fact, the intake manifold pattern here, it's the most common intake pattern for all the CVHs. Because in North America, if you have a 1.6, this is the only intake pattern you'll have. And it's where you have one port, a coolant port between 2 and 3, and, another intake port, and your fourth and final intake port. Where's it going with that? Oh, so this intake port is not symmetrical left to right as much as it may look like it is. It is not. You do not want to goof that up when you're trying to put the gasket on, intake manifold gasket. But if you're paying any amount of attention, you should be able to see the very apparent difference. But the only difference is where the bolt holes go. You'll hook it up and you'll think, wait, why isn't my, did I get the wrong gasket? Why is my stuff not lining up? Well, you either just have the gasket backwards or flipped around. So you just need to reorient it. These intake bolts are really hard. I'm thinking someone's changed out this intake manifold. Now, it doesn't mean it's a different one. I believe this one to be correct, original to the engine, because the part number is correct. The date says an 81. But all these bolts are so insanely hard. I got a feeling someone's been through the top end once before. It's one of the easy ways to tell if your engine is original or not is if it's had, and also see if it's rolled over or not, the odometers. Because if your car shows, say, for miles, 20,000-ish, you can check it over pretty good. If the part numbers on everything on the top end match, then it's a good chance you do have only a 20,000 mile engine, and assuming it looks clean and decent, everything else, of course. But if it reads, say, 20, and you notice that the head part number doesn't match, then it's got 120 or more. Because the only reason for the head to be changed on these 1.6s is if the head is if the timing belt had failed, which happens around the 60,000 mark. You need to be changing them every 50. Be smart. So if the timing belt failed, which we know happens like a clock at 60, everyone I know who's ever had one failed, it just happened somewhere between 60 on the dot and 64. So if it fails somewhere in there, you will be taking the head off. Ooh. At whatever point that is. So if you show north of 60,000 miles, kind of be anything, but it's when people claim that they have something that hasn't rolled over. And it's like, well, you know, show me these 3 part numbers, and I'll tell you if it's accurate or not. The engine had to be replaced at all either. That's your other telltale. But on the 1.9s, however, things get a little tricky because those are non-interference. So should the timing belt break, you're not going to ruin your head or put dents in the pistons, anything like that. Absolutely nothing will happen. You just line it back up, throw on the belt, go for a drive again. Okay, so I got all 1, 2, 3 with 1 on the bottom, 1, 2, 3 with 1 on the top. My nuts off, and yes, the intake manifold is on there pretty good this time. So we will grab our small pry bar. There's a couple places to insert it. One of the nice ones is this embossment for the fuel pump, especially if you don't plan on using it. And then there's one, of course, on the other side of the intake as well. So one over each of the ears, we'll say. Oh yeah, so with that off, you can see there's a lot of oxidation inside the ports. So I'm thinking some way, somehow water got inside each of these. Hopefully not too bad. This just got me amazed because I recall this running quite well. Sure stinks. The smell is not fun. Okay, now we can get to removing the valve cover. This hose we'll try to remove. If it doesn't, we'll leave it attached and the valve cover will just dangle for now. I usually end up cutting these, but lately I'm trying to save them. I don't know why. Probably so it's not being a catch for the frickin' crankcase. But what this hose does is it equalizes the pressure between the valve cover and the crankcase, so it allows the crankcase pressures to come up into the valve cover out this port where it can go back to the intake. And what happens is this hose, due to poor oil changes and poor running conditions, it gets very hard and it fills up with carbon at the bottom. And then it blocks off completely, so then your crankcase pressures build up until you blow out main seals. Blowing out main seals isn't all that fun. Makes for one heck of a mess too. Jeez, let me tell you. Okay, so that's off. Off, and then once the valve cover's off, I'll grab the camera again and we can show you inside this thing. You'll be able to see what it looks like. I haven't peeked inside this yet either. The valve cover bolts we're going to hold on to. Once the valve cover is off, we'll flip it upside down. We'll just chuck the bolts inside of it. Needs a full cleaning inside and out, and then sandblasting on the outside. So it's going to be painted blue again. That would be nice. Should have grabbed the depot because then I could do these spark plug wire standoffs. So we'll do that now. Okay, moment of truth. Up it came. There was no gasket. This valve cover is just gooped on. There's plenty of moisture on the inside. Now you can run by it. Okay, so let's show you some of that. But if it wasn't for the moisture, this guy's actually in decent shape. There's no terrible oil staining or anything. So whoever was using this was, doing a good job. They didn't document the miles for nothing. It all shows. All right, so let's get the timing belt off now. Got to undo a couple bolts. Pry that off to the side. We'll try showing you the best we can. No promises, because you've seen my shoddy camera work. I'll do that over here so you can see something at least. It's 10mm for the tensioner. Tensioner should be spring loaded. And I do see the spring. So then, with that taken care of, we grab our little pry bar again. When we remember where we put it. There's a spot right next to the water pump that you can pry off of. Oops. We'll grab the bigger pry bar. The water pump, it does have the squared off portion for you to do this. It's literally designed for this. Only needs to get partially off. Now it's off. Set that to the side. Okay, so I've made that that cam bolt loose already, so I don't need to fight that. You want to make sure that's loose before you take the head off, and well, before you take the belt off too. So that's no fun to try fighting off, and I can feel it's actually pretty loose here. Yeah. So they'll pull off by hand, so that's handy. We'll leave that on there for now so that we can turn this thing if we really need to. But now we can start doing the head bolts. It's just a matter of grabbing, I think, 13. Yes. Big wrench. Yes. Without knocking the camera over. Yes. Getting the proper stance is the trick. Otherwise, we can fire up one back down. Try to remove them in the correct pattern. It would be the outside in a starter pattern. To be technical, go like this is the next one. The pattern I can do anyways. Now the head bolts are not reusable. However, if you crack open your valve cover and see ARP studs, those are reusable. So if you see studs and nuts in here, those are reusable as intended. They are torqued to 60 or 65 foot-pounds, and then you turn the wrench 90 degrees twice. So realistically, to break these free, we'll need something like 75, 80 foot-pounds. Maybe even closer to 90. But got all of them loose. So now I'll go through by hand, remove them. I'll put them in my oil catch can. These guys are going to be a little wet and messy. And then once they're clean, they can just be pitched. They're not reusable, like I said. There's 3 out of the 10. Wish I knew how all this water got in here. This was a really nice engine. Now I'm fearful of the condition of the bores. The good news, however, if it does need boring, it will get high compression pistons. I was just hoping to avoid that expense. I do have a few high compression pistons in oversized sizes. I think I only have one set in stock sizes. Cool. Put the socket down, gather up all the bolts. Sometimes they have washers, sometimes they don't. If they do have washers, they are going to be better hardware, because then your torque is going to be more accurate. Trying to turn a bolt, a steel bolt on aluminum by itself is very friction prominent. Adding a washer, you help reduce some of that friction. So now, let's gather up some of this excess moisture so I'm not making a lake in the garage here. And then we'll bust out our big pry bar. Look around for a couple well-placed spots to pry. I see one over here. The back side of the head hangs off of the block, so it's almost always a great place to pry off of. You see, it didn't take much of anything. I probably could have just pulled this off by hand. All right, so it's good. We will set that down. All right. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure this head gasket has been changed at some point. It's bright orange, like it's got copper spray. I'll show you inside here. I think this engine will clean up real pretty. Yeah, just a tiny bit of surface rust up top. That'll clean up fine. Otherwise, cross hatching is still fabulous. We will, however, grab our 19 mil wrench and turn this over a little bit. Yeah, fabulous. Those piston rings alone might scrape off what little rust there is. Yep, pretty much. Okay, and then we won't get too crazy with this. I don't want to be scoring anything, so leave it like it is for now. We'll call that good. We'll grab some sort of pan I can lay the head in. Normally have like a larger steel or aluminum cake pans hanging around just for this exact reason, but we will just use the valve cover. That's more or less what it's for. So let me set the camera down here just for a minute. Get the bask in the glory of that little 1.6 as I get this head around, and then we'll show you what the head looks like. Set it down upside down. Bingo boingo. Here is our head, and I squatted down too soon. I should have grabbed that 19. We can we'll turn the camshaft over as best we can here. Oops. Got to thread it in a little bit. Yeah, we'll just do that. Assuming I can turn it with one hand, and I probably can't. Yep, I don't think I can. The valve springs are rated for like 200 pounds each, and there's 8 of them. You know, depending on where things are, they can be quite the bear to open. But yeah, looking at this guy, no head gasket failure, so I have no reason to think this head was warped. I don't see any cracks between any of the valves. What's interesting is the machining here. The machining is very interesting. You can see the shoulders around each of these valves. Normally they're just a perfect 45-degree chamfer, but you can see that they have a few different cutting tool paths. And in some of them, they kind of look like they overlap. So I'll have to clean these up really good, make sure that those rings we see are not seats. But I'm pretty sure they're just the normal aluminum with tooling paths. But overall, I'd say this engine's pretty nice. I feel really bad about the little bit of rust that got in the 2 middle bores, but nothing in the outside ones. And even still, these are at the top and practically nothing. So I'll be able to take a ball hone to these, quick clean them up, get a fresh cross hatch in them, and then we'll check out the rings. If I have new ones around, we'll get new ones. If I don't, we'll reuse the old. But yeah, I'm thrilled. I see no problems whatsoever. So we'll end the video in just a couple moments here. After I describe my next steps for this guy. So what's going to happen is this is getting more or less a full rebuild. I'm not going to change things that don't need changing, but it is going to get fresh bearings in the entire bottom end. It's going to get all new valve seals up top, the updated ones. The updated ones have metal bottoms, so they look like top hats. They're held down by the valve springs too, as opposed to the original ones, which are only held in by friction. Throughout heat cycles, they eventually harden, and they no longer grip the guides that they grip to. So then they just start floating up and down with the valves, and that's when you get some insane oil consumption out of these. One makes your oil disappear, and 2 makes for smoky exhaust and a little bit of stink while it runs. So we're going to sort out all that. We'll go through the camshaft. We'll evaluate that. If it needs replacing, we'll replace it. I try changing these out for the high output camshafts. They do have a little bit more power, but the biggest thing is longevity. They are essentially the same cam profile, but a little bit more lift, like a 0.02 inches more lift, which isn't a lot, but is at the cam, so it makes for something measurable at the valve. But the bigger thing is, with that extra meat on the cam, you have a lot more duration. If not just the cam timing duration, I mean that's longevity. The cam will live a longer life just because there's more metal on it. The base, well, actually any of the stock cams for these 1.6s up until 1984 or 85, somewhere in there, they've finally changed out the camshafts. But up until that point, it's one of the it's either number 3's intake or number 4's exhaust. One of those two, in the far right cylinders, one of those cam lobes is casted, not machined, but casted, thinner, marginally, noticeably thinner than the whole rest of them. And that actually makes the lifter above it wear out sooner. It also makes that particular lobe wear out sooner. So you can have that that one lobe and lifter be shot in the matter of just 50, 60,000 miles. And then every 20-ish, you should be adjusting the rockers of these flat tappets. Eventually, as things wear, the tappet adjusters run out of adjustable range. So then you have to kind of manually go in there with each rocker, loosen them up and then snug them back down, make sure that you're getting the proper lash out of each of them. But with that one lobe dying drastically sooner than all the others, you have to be very conscientious about all this camera stuff. I can't stress it enough. However, many replacements do not have that issue. So it's just something you need to check out. If you're getting a brand new cam, you need to be looking it over. And I am pretty sure I have a bad one. Let's see, it almost says 1.6 cams. These ones I think are all toast. So I bet I can grab just any of them and show you how bad they are. Yep, so here's one of them. I don't know off the top of my head how many miles this one has. But you'll be able to see here. We'll orient it the same way as the rest of it is. One of these lobes is not like the others. I think it's this one. It's thinner at the top, that's for sure. Do have a micrometer. Let's bust that out so you know that's not shooting hot air. Huh. It's not in its hole. Oh, there it is. It's already busted out. Okay. So, turn it on, zero it out. At the top of this lobe, we are showing 0.654 inches. Oh, here we go. Better measurement. 0.63. Top of this one. 0.62. Oops. Top of this one. 0.62. There's one of these. Maybe this is a replacement cam. 0.62. This one could be a replacement cam. I labeled it, whatever the heck it was. It says 1.6 high output is what it was. So this one might not be an offender. I know for sure the earliest ones are. So grab another one here. What's this one say? Another 1.6 high output. Jeez, where'd I get all these? Another question, where have they been hiding on me? I had frickin' 3 of them. What's this one? I think I found it. I think I found it. This one, I can see from here, even in the dark, it is drastically thinner than the others. So, and maybe I'm right about this. I know that there was a casting change for these come 84, 85, and it wasn't because they had tweaked the cam profile. They're identical. But here we go. Does this one lobe look thinner than the rest to you? Right? Right? Here we go. As soon as I'm done breaking all my cams. Yeah, there we go. So expert's not delusional after all here. Yeah? We'll zero out. Put the camera in my recessive hand. What's that say? I guess I turned it to millimeters. 14.4 millimeters versus 16.4. 2 millimeters smaller is that cam. That one particular lobe. And that is, let's line this up here, intake of number 4. Intake of number 4, 2 millimeters thinner lobe than the whole rest of them. Burns up a heck of a lot faster. You can see that here plain as day. You know, where the oil stain is, that's the gap. That's where the lifter is not riding. Where it's fully polished is where the lifter is completely riding. Over here, you can see on the ramp up, there's a lot of oil staining here. On this one, like none, practically none. And we'll compare it to another intake valve just to be thorough. That one's got a bunch. This one here has none. You can actually feel it's rounded over. You can almost see it. And then on the back side, same story. And then there's even some casting defects here. You can actually see where the metal is pitted. So not only this is casted thinner, it's casted more poorly. That's just crazy. Just crazy. I bet you thought I was making crap up. So there's that to contend with when you're replacing the cams. That's just something you need to be aware of and watch for. Especially if you have an 81 to 83 for sure, you need to be checking those. I think 84 is when they finally addressed it. I do have a different video about it where I actually talk about it in further detail and show my measurements and refer to some actual documentation. So you know I'm not just making stuff up. And then you get all the facts. But yeah, we'll leave the video here for now. As I go through this more, we'll have a couple small videos to follow up with the rebuilding of the bottom end. And one for rebuilding the top end, but for the most part, this is kind of everything I wanted to show you. People have been asking about videos for engine removals and engine rebuilds, so I thought this would be the step in the right direction. So it's a full, basically unedited time lapse of me doing this in full detail with full walkthrough and voiceover and everything, because we're doing it in the here and now. But yeah, so we'll keep going on this, and we'll have a video of when it's ready to go into the car it's going into. I think this is going to go into my red 81 wagon after it gets a little bit of work. We're also going to port the head. We're going to make that better, and I'll look at my collection of intake manifolds. If I can fit a larger one and without there being a lot of port work, we'll do that too. If I can get away with a larger camshaft, we'll do that too. If I can get away with the bigger carb, the 32-34 instead of what this had, the 32-32, we'll do that too. If I can fit a header, we'll do that too. So we'll do everything we can to make this a factory high output, but pretty sure it's just going to keep these little compression pistons. But that's all right. With all the other improvements we did on weight-wise and exhaust-wise and port-wise, I think this will scoot. Because right now the red wagon has exactly this in factory condition, and that thing hauls pretty good with its current exhaust mod and nothing else. And we're refining more than that, and we're also going to do the exhaust better. That's just going to get a header. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them behind in the comment section. I do go through those fairly often, actually. So just give me a day or two, and I usually get to those. Otherwise, we'll see you later.